My name is Serena. I was 26 years old and I was not okay. I know people say that all the time. I'm not okay. They say it about bad days, about traffic, about when their coffee order gets messed up at the drive-thru. But I mean it in the deeper sense. The kind of not okay that settles into your bones quietly over many months. Until one day you realize you cannot remember the last time you felt genuinely fully alive. It had started with Priya. Priya and I had been together for 3 years. We met at an art show in Atlanta, this tiny underground gallery in a converted warehouse in Cabbagetown where a friend of mine was exhibiting photographs. She was standing in front of a picture of an empty highway at dawn, a glass of cheap wine in her hand, and she was crying. Not dramatically, not in a way that called attention to itself. Just quietly, 2 tears tracking down her face while she stared at the photograph. I walked over because I was curious. Because who cries at an empty highway photograph? Who feels that kind of thing? Priya did. Priya felt everything that deeply all the time, every day. It was the most beautiful thing about her and also, eventually, the most exhausting. She felt the joy of small things so intensely it could take your breath away. She also felt the pain of small things the same way. And loving someone who lives at that volume, at that frequency, for 3 years, it wears you down in ways you don't notice until you're already worn. We didn't break up because we stopped loving each other. We broke up because she got a job offer in Seattle that was too good to refuse, and I couldn't leave Atlanta. And we tried the long-distance thing for 8 months and watched our relationship slowly dissolve like sugar in warm water. Present for a while. Then less present. Then gone. The actual end was quiet. A phone call on a Tuesday night in November. She cried. I cried. We said things we meant. We said goodbye in the way you say goodbye when you know you're not coming back. And then I was alone, in my apartment in Atlanta, with a graphic design business and a very good coffee maker and absolutely no idea what to do with myself. I threw myself into work. I was a freelance designer, brand identities, logos, packaging, visual systems for small businesses all over the country. I could do it entirely from my apartment, which meant I had no built-in structure to my days. No coworkers to check in with, no reason to leave unless I made myself. And I stopped making myself. Months went by. I designed things. I ate poorly. I watched a lot of television. I went to bed too late and woke up tired. I told myself I was healing. I told myself this is what healing looked like sometimes. I told myself I was fine. My best friend Deja Monroe was not fooled. Deja had known me since our sophomore year of college. When she found me crying in a bathroom over a typography assignment I failed and took me out for tacos and said, with complete certainty, that I was going to be okay. That was her superpower, that certainty. She could look at you at your absolute worst and still see the version of you that was doing fine. And somehow that vision was more real to her than whatever mess was standing in front of her. She'd been watching me dissolve for 8 months with increasing concern. And in early June, she called me on a Tuesday evening while I was staring at a client's brief for a bakery brand identity that I could not make myself care about, and she said, without any greeting whatsoever, my family is doing a 4th of July BBQ. You're coming. Deja, you're coming, Serena. My mother has already added you to the head count. She bought extra chicken. Here's the thing about Deja's mother, Paulette Monroe. She was one of those women who adopt stray people with the same warm, matter-of-fact efficiency with which some people collect houseplants. She had unofficially adopted me years ago, somewhere around junior year of college, and since then my presence at Monroe family events had been a standing expectation rather than an invitation. Declining Paulette Monroe was not something I was capable of. She was simply too warm to say no to. It would be like refusing a hug from the sun. Fine, I said. I'll come. Good, Deja said. Wear something other than that gray sweatshirt. I know that's what you've been wearing. I can hear it in your voice. I looked down at my gray sweatshirt. I hate you, I said. I love you too, she said. 4th of July, don't be late. I told myself it was just a barbecue, an afternoon of potato, salad and sparklers and catching up with people I hadn't seen in a while. A few hours out of the apartment, a few hours of being reminded that other humans existed and had things to say to me. Nothing significant. Nothing life-changing. I was so wrong. The Monroe family home was in Decatur. A big warm colonial house on a quiet street with oak trees and a yard that Paulette kept immaculate most of the year but allowed to become wonderfully chaotic during holiday gatherings when I arrived. On the 4th of July, a little after noon, the yard was already full of life. There were long folding tables covered in red and white checkered tablecloths, loaded with food in that specific Monroe family way, every dish taking up more space than it needed to, pushed close together, overflowing. There was a grill that Deja's Uncle Raymond was tending with the focused intensity of a surgeon. There were children everywhere, running through a sprinkler someone had set up in the corner of the yard, shrieking with joy. There was music coming from somewhere, something old school and soulful. Not too loud, just enough to fill the air. I stood at the gate for a moment and just breathed it in. The smell of charcoal and cut grass and something sweet someone had baked. There was always someone who had baked, and the sound of all those voices layered on top of each other, talking over and under and through each other the way a close family does, where nobody waits for a conversational gap because there are never any gaps. I hadn't realized how much I had missed noise. How quiet my apartment had become. Deja appeared from nowhere and grabbed my arm. "You're here," she said, pulling me through the gate. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress and the expression of someone who had been managing family logistics since 7 in the morning and was relieved to have reinforcements. "My cousin Marcus has already started an argument about college football and my grandmother is winning, and I need someone sane." "Your grandmother always wins," I said. "She really does," Deja agreed. "Come on, let's get you food and introduce you to the people you don't know." I knew most of them. Paulette Monroe, warm and sharp-eyed, who hugged me for a long moment and said I looked thin and needed to eat, which was her love language. Earl Monroe, Deja's father, a big quiet man who expressed affection by grilling meat, exactly the way you requested it and never forgetting how you took your sweet tea. He handed me a glass without being asked, and the fact that he'd remembered 2 sugars. No mint made me feel unexpectedly cared for. I said hello to aunts and uncles. I played cornhole with teenage cousins and lost embarrassingly. I ate Paulette's potato salad, which was one of the great food experiences of my life. I don't know what she puts in it. I have asked, she has never told me, and I suspect she never will. I ate ribs off the grill and a piece of someone's sweet potato pie, and I felt myself slowly unfurl. The tightness I'd been carrying for months loosening just a little in the warm afternoon air. I was sitting with Deja's grandmother May near the back porch, listening to her tell a story about a road trip she'd taken in 1967 that seemed to involve a broken-down Cadillac, a bluegrass band, and a woman she referred to only as the redhead from Tennessee with a very particular smile. When Deja appeared at my elbow, "Hey," she said, "there's someone I want you to meet." "Sure," I said. "Who?" "My Aunt Vivienne," Deja said. "She just got here." And I stood up, completely unprepared. And my whole life changed direction. She was standing near the gate still, talking to Earl, and she hadn't taken her sunglasses off yet. And even so, she was one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen in my life. I want to try to describe her properly, because she deserves to be described properly. And because the way she looked in that first moment is something I have carried with me since. She was tall, maybe 5 feet 9 inches. With the natural, easy posture of someone who has never once in their life hunched apologetically to take up less space. She was wearing a simple cream-colored linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and dark slacks. And the combination was too formal for a backyard barbecue, except that on her it wasn't formal at all. It was just how she dressed. And she wore it the way she wore everything, like it was exactly right. And she'd never given it a second thought. Her hair was natural, cut close on the sides and fuller on top, and it was dark with a few threads of silver running through it that she clearly did not try to hide. The silver was not hidden because she had long ago stopped worrying about things like that. And that confidence, the confidence of a woman who had decided who she was and was done apologizing for it, came off her like warmth off summer pavement. She was older than me. I registered that immediately, maybe late 30s, early 40s. I would learn later she was 42. 16 years older than me. Deja said something. I heard my name. I heard Aunt Vivienne and my best friend, and she's basically family. Vivian turned from Earl toward us, and she reached up and took her sunglasses off in one easy, unhurried movement. And I had the sensation that you sometimes get at high altitude, momentary lightheadedness. A feeling that the ground is slightly less stable than you expected. Her eyes were dark brown. They were the kind of eyes that were doing several things at once, thinking, evaluating, noticing, and also somehow at the same time completely relaxed about all of it. There were fine lines at the corners of those eyes. I noticed them. They only made her face more real, more interesting, more her. She smiled. It was slow. It didn't rush to arrive, just came in at its own pace, like it had nowhere better to be. Serena, she said. Good to meet you. Deja's told me about you. Her voice. I need to tell you about her voice because it mattered enormously. It was low and even and precise, with a very faint quality to it that I couldn't place right away. Later, I would learn she'd grown up partly in Lagos, partly in London before coming to the States for graduate school. And the accent had mostly smoothed away over decades, but surfaced in certain words in the way she said certain vowels, in the particular rhythm of longer sentences. It gave her voice a quality I can only describe as careful. Like every word was chosen not frantically, not with effort, but with the calm confidence of someone who has always known that words matter. Good things. I hope, I said. Mostly good things, she said. And there was something in her eyes that might have been amusement. And I stood there feeling like I had walked into the middle of a story that had been going on for some time without me. We shook hands. Her grip was firm and brief and completely appropriate for a first meeting at a family barbecue. And I was aware of the warmth of her hand long after she'd let go. Deja materialized at my elbow the moment Vivian turned to greet Paulette. So that's Aunt Vivienne, she said, in the tone of someone watching my face with considerable interest. She's, I started. Stunning, yes, I know, Deja said. She always has been. She's also married. Just wanted to mention that. The word landed the way a stone lands in still water. Small and packed. Wide ripples, I started. Serena, Deja said with great gentleness. I have known you for 8 years. I know exactly what your face looks like when you're not doing anything. I looked away. Across the yard, Vivian was laughing at something May had said. Her head had tipped back slightly, and one hand had pressed briefly to her chest, like she needed to contain the laugh. It was completely unguarded, completely unself-conscious. A tiny window into something real underneath all that composed elegance. It did not help my situation at all. I'm fine, I said. Of course you are, Deja said. And she was very carefully not smiling. I did not engineer sitting next to her. I want to make that clear. I had every intention of admiring Vivian Okafor from a reasonable distance for the afternoon, going home thinking about her for an appropriate amount of time, and then filing the whole thing away under beautiful people I have. Briefly met and moving on with my life. What I did not account for was Vivian sitting down next to me. It happened about an hour after we'd met. I'd found a quiet corner of the back porch, half watching the ongoing water balloon war in the yard and half thinking about the bakery brand identity that I still couldn't make myself care about. The afternoon was deep and golden, the kind of summer afternoon that slows time down. And I had a glass of lemonade and a plate with some ribs on it, and I was doing something I hadn't done in months. Just sitting still without guilt. Vivian appeared with 2 glasses of lemonade and held one out toward me with a slight questioning look, not presuming. Just offering. I took it. She settled into the chair beside me with the ease of someone comfortable in their own body, comfortable in space. And she looked out at the yard for a moment before she spoke. You looked like you were somewhere else, she said. Thinking about work, I said. Occupational hazard. What do you do? When I told her I was a graphic designer, she became immediately interested. Not politely interested, genuinely interested. In the way that is immediately obvious to any person who has spent time having polite conversations. She asked real questions. Specific questions. She asked about how I handled the tension between what a client asks for and what they actually need. She asked whether I found it limiting or liberating to work alone. She asked about the bakery brief that was giving me trouble. And I found myself actually describing it, the brief, my instinctive response. Why I now felt my response was wrong. She listened the whole time without interrupting. Real listening, where you can feel the other person taking in what you say and actually thinking about it. Not just waiting for their turn to speak. It sounds like you went safe when they needed unique, she said when I finished. The brief probably said warm and inviting, and you heard familiar. when what they actually meant was ours. I stared at her. That is exactly what's wrong with it. Start the color palette over, she said. Trust your gut. What do you do? I asked, because I suddenly realized I had been talking about myself for 15 straight minutes and knew nothing about her. I'm an architect, she said. Something clicked. The precision of her questions. The way she talked about design like it was a set of problems with elegant solutions waiting inside them. Residential or commercial? Both. I run a small firm. We do mostly residential and community projects. She paused. The community projects are the ones I love. What kind of community projects? And she described a community center she and her partners had designed for a low-income neighborhood on the west side of Atlanta. 3 years of work. Navigating city funding and bureaucratic delays and competing visions from the people in the community itself. Which she said with great respect, the community's competing visions were not obstacles, she said. They were information. They told you what the building needed to be. She talked about it the way you talk about something you truly love. The atrium with the skylights that move the light through the space differently in different seasons. The library with shelves built specifically to be reachable by small children. The rooftop garden. The way the multi-purpose hall could transform. From a meeting space to a dance studio to a voting precinct. I could have listened to her talk about that building for hours. You built something that people actually live in, I said. When there was a pause. Not just look at. That feels different. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. That's the point, she said quietly. That's the only point for me. Buildings that people inhabit. I'm not interested in things that are admired from the outside. I sat with that for a moment. We kept talking. The afternoon moved around us, the noise of the party rising and falling. Children running past, someone starting a game of dominoes nearby that got loud. We were in the middle of it all and somehow also slightly apart from it. In our own small world of conversation. At some point I noticed her wedding ring, a simple gold band on her left hand. She gestured to illustrate something about the community center. And I'd seen it, and after that I was aware of it in the way you are aware of something you've trained yourself not to look at directly. Married. She was married. I reminded myself of everything I knew to be true. Married, Deja's aunt. 16 years older than me. Almost certainly straight. I was recovering from a painful breakup. I was not in a position to have feelings for anyone, let alone someone who was unavailable in multiple ways at once. I reminded myself of all of this with great firmness, and then she laughed at something I said. Real laugh. Unguarded, with her whole face in it, and every firm reminder dissolved completely. Deja drove me home as the sun was going down. The Atlanta sky was doing the thing it does on summer evenings where it can't decide between orange and purple and ends up being both. And the city looked beautiful through the car window, warm and gold. We drove for about 10 minutes in comfortable silence, and then Deja said, "So?" "Don't," I said. "I'm just Deja." She was quiet. Then, "She liked you. Just so you know." She doesn't usually stay in one conversation that long at family events. She usually does the rounds and then finds somewhere quiet by herself. I watched the city go by and said nothing. Her marriage isn't. Deja started and then stopped herself. I turned to look at her. Her marriage isn't what? Deja had a complicated relationship with information about other people. She believed strongly in privacy. She also believed strongly in honesty. These two values were sometimes in conflict, and I could see that conflict happening on her face in real time. "I'm not going to say things that aren't mine to say," she said finally. "But don't write things off before they need to be written off." "That's all I'll say." "What does that mean, Deja?" "It means," she stopped again. It means sometimes things look a certain way and they're not that way. And sometimes people are in the middle of a story that isn't finished yet." She glanced at me quickly. "That's all I'm going to say." I spent the rest of the drive home sitting with that, turning it over. When she pulled up outside my building, she leaned across and hugged me. Tight and long, the kind of hug she saved for when she meant it. "You deserve someone who really sees you," she said, against my hair. "I've always wanted that for you. That's all this is." I went upstairs and sat on my couch in the dark and did not think about Vivian Okafor for approximately 0 minutes before giving up and thinking about her. Constantly. The next morning I started the bakery color palette over from scratch. Deep terracotta, pale sage green, warm brass accents. Something alive, something specific, something that could only belong to this one bakery and not to any other. When I sent it to the client, she called me within the hour. Her voice was bright and certain. "That's it," she said. "That's exactly us." "How did you know?" I thought about a woman on a back porch in the late afternoon sun, who had heard me describe a problem and reflected the answer back to me like a mirror. "I had some help," I said. "I didn't plan to see Vivian again so quickly. I was at the Monroes for a Sunday dinner," which was a standing monthly thing for me. Paulette had decided years ago that I was coming to Sunday dinner once a month and had never undecided it. And honestly, I didn't want her to. I arrived with a peach cobbler because Earl had mentioned last time it was his favorite. And I found the usual warm chaos of the Monroe home on a Sunday evening. Vivian was in the living room. She was sitting on the arm of the sofa, talking to May, and she was wearing a simple dark green dress and her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. And she looked up when I came in and her face opened into a smile. My whole chest lit up like I'd swallowed something warm. I said hello to May. I said hello to Vivian. I behaved, I believe, like a reasonable adult human person. At dinner, we ended up sitting next to each other. This was not arranged, it was simply where the chairs were, and neither of us moved them. I noticed Deja noticed this and then chose, with obvious effort, not to react. Dinner conversation at the Monroe table was always fast and layered. 10 things happening at once, and Vivian moved through it easily. She was comfortable here, natural, clearly part of this family in a real way. She teased May. She talked football with Earl in a way that suggested she actually knew what she was talking about. She laughed at Deja's mother's stories. She was warm with everyone at the table, in the particular way of someone whose warmth is real rather than performed. She wasn't trying to seem warm. She just was. During dessert, she tried a piece of my peach cobbler. She made a sound of quiet appreciation, the kind that comes out involuntarily when something is better than you expected. And she turned to me and said, "This is wonderful." "Earl's favorite," I said. "I try to bring it when I can." She smiled. Then, more quietly, just between us, how did the color palette go? That she had remembered. That she had asked. "Really well," I said. "The client loved it." "You were right." "You were right," she said. I just said it out loud. I looked at her. She was looking back at me with that quality of attention I noticed at the BBQ, the real kind, the kind that makes you feel seen rather than observed. There was something in her eyes I couldn't name. Something that was both certain and careful at the same time. "Can I ask you something?" I said before I could stop myself. "Of course." I stopped. The question I'd been about to ask about her marriage, about what Deja had said, wasn't mine to ask. Not here, not yet, not like this. "Never mind," I said. "It's personal." Something shifted in her expression. Just slightly. "You can ask me personal things," she said, quietly and directly. "I might not always answer, but you can always ask." I spent the rest of dessert trying to figure out what that meant. It was May Monroe who engineered what came next. May was 91 years old. She'd been watching people and understanding their patterns for 9 decades. And she deployed that understanding with the precision of someone who had long ago mastered the art of giving things exactly the nudge they needed and no more. Was on the Monroe's porch one Saturday morning in late July, having coffee with Deja and May, and the conversation turned to the community center. I must have mentioned it to Deja at some point that Vivian had described it and it sounded extraordinary. And Deja had mentioned this to May. May looked at me over her coffee cup with an expression of patient, strategic interest. "Vivian takes people through that building sometimes," she said. "Architecture students, community groups, people who care about spaces." "It sounds remarkable," I said. "You design things," May said. Not a question. A statement. Brand identities and visual systems. "It's a little different from design is design," May said, with the authority of someone who has decided this is true. "Call her." She say yes. Deja was studying her coffee with extraordinary interest. I called Vivian 2 days later, when I could no longer convince myself there was a good reason to. Wait, she picked up on the second ring and said Serena with the particular warmth of someone who had been expecting a call and wasn't sorry it had come. We made plans to meet the following Saturday at the community center. I found the building easily. It was everything she described a low, generous structure in pale brick with a wide front overhang and tall windows that you could see even from the parking lot. We're doing something intentional with the morning light. There was a courtyard at the front with benches and a small garden, and children were already running a relay race through the garden paths when I arrived. Vivian was waiting near the entrance. She had dressed simply: jeans, a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, clean sneakers. She looked exactly like herself, which is a thing that sounds simple and is actually quite rare. Some people look like a version of themselves they've constructed for public consumption. Vivian just looked like Vivian. She took me through every part of it. And she talked about every part of it with the specificity of someone who remembered every decision, every problem, every compromise that had made the building better rather than worse. The atrium, where the angled skylights created shifting light that never stayed the same. The children's library, the low shelves, the bright colors chosen specifically to be visually inviting to kids. The multi-purpose hall. The outdoor classroom. The rooftop garden where neighborhood families grew tomatoes and herbs and sometimes just sat. The building was alive. That was the thing. It wasn't a monument, a beautiful object to be photographed and admired. It was full of people. A woman was reading in the courtyard. 2 men were having a meeting in a corner of the atrium. A group of teenagers was playing cards in the lobby, loud and comfortable. Children moved through the library like water. You built something people inhabit, I said when we came back to the atrium at the end. Really inhabit. It belongs to them. She looked at me for a moment. That specific Vivian looked, thinking multiple things at once, feeling something she was deciding whether to say. That's all I want, she said quietly. Buildings that belong to the people inside them. I thought about her. About the way she described what she wanted. About the feeling I kept getting talking to her. That I was in the presence of someone who had thought hard about what mattered and made decisions accordingly. We got coffee afterward at a small place nearby, and we talked for 2 hours. And by the time we stood on the sidewalk saying goodbye, I had passed some internal threshold. I hadn't known I was approaching. She touched my arm as she said goodbye. Just a hand on my forearm, a brief, warm contact, nothing, perfectly friendly, perfectly appropriate. I felt it for the entire drive home. I need to stop the story here. Because the real shock, the one I promised you at the beginning, the one that isn't about meeting a beautiful woman at a barbecue, it happens now. And it changes everything. It was a Wednesday evening in early August, 5 weeks after the 4th of July. Deja called me and asked me to come over. Her voice had a careful quality I recognized. The voice she used when she was containing something significant and needed to deliver it properly. I drove to Decatur with my stomach doing the low, slow anxiety thing it does when someone says, I need to tell you something, in that tone. Deja met me at the door and took me to the kitchen. Paulette was already at the table with tea. May was humming something in the living room. There was a quality to the house that held breath. Sit down, Paulette said. I sat. Deja sat across from me and folded her hands on the table and looked at me with the expression she gets when she's about to say something real. I've been carrying something, she said. And I think you deserve to know. Because I love you. And I don't want you going through something without the full picture. I waited. Vivian's marriage, she said. It's over. It ended in January. The divorce was finalized in March. The kitchen was very quiet. She's been going through a hard year, Deja continued. But she's also been finding herself in a way she hasn't before. And I talked to her, Serena. I asked if I could tell you. She said yes. She wanted you to tell me? I said carefully, she wanted to tell you herself. She's been trying to figure out the right moment for weeks. She didn't want you to find out from someone else, but she also, Deja paused. She said she didn't want to presume. Presume what? Deja looked at her mother. Paulette gave a small nod. She said something else, Deja said. And I'm going to quote her directly because she said I could. She said she hasn't felt like herself in years. And that this summer, for the first time, she thinks she's starting to. And that she thinks you have something to do with that. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear May humming in the next room. Was very still. Paulette reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, warm, steady. "There's one more thing," Deja said in a different voice. Quieter, more careful. About why the marriage ended. About what Vivian has been figuring out this year. She looked at me directly. "I'm going to say this because she said I could. And because you deserve to know, and because I think it matters for you specifically." "Okay," I said. "Vivian is gay," Deja said. "Or she doesn't know exactly what word fits yet. She said she doesn't know what to call it. But she said that she has been pushing something down her whole adult life. Something she didn't know how to look at directly. And this year, for the first time, she started looking at it. She told me, my mom, in this kitchen 2 months ago. She sat right where you're sitting, and she told us, and she cried. And we held her." I sat with that for a long, long moment. The weight of it. Not just what it meant for what might be possible between us, though that too, yes. My heart was doing something enormous and loud in my chest, but what it meant about what Vivian had been carrying. A woman who had spent her whole adult life with something true about herself pushed down, unseen, unspoken. Who had been married for 14 years in a life that didn't quite fit. Who had spent 42 years before she could sit in a kitchen and say the truth out loud. I knew something about that weight. Not the exact version I had come out at 18, which was its own complicated story, but at least it was early, at least it was young. I knew what the silence weighed. And I understood, sitting in that kitchen with Paulette's hand over mine, that what Vivian had done this year was one of the bravest things a person could do. "Is she okay?" I asked. It was the first thing I thought to say. Deja's expression went soft with something like love. "Yeah," she said. "She's really okay." She said it feels like being able to breathe for the first time. Outside in the yard, the summer evening was going all golden. May was still humming. Paulette squeezed my hand. I drove home slowly, taking back roads through Decatur, not in any hurry to arrive anywhere. The Atlanta air was warm through my open windows, thick with the smell of summer jasmine and warm concrete and that sweet olive. Scent that shows up in certain neighborhoods if you know to notice it. I thought about Vivian. Not with the careful, restrained quality I'd been using all summer, keeping my distance from my own feelings about her. Reminding myself of all the reasons, building walls I could feel were insufficient, even as I was building them. I thought about her openly. The way you can think about someone when the reasons not to have changed. I thought about her at 42 years old, sitting in a kitchen telling the truth about herself for the first time. I thought about what that takes. I thought about the cost of all those years of silence. I thought about her saying this year feels like being able to breathe, and I felt something in my chest that was equal parts joy and grief. Joy for the breathing, grief for all the years before it. I thought about trust your gut. I thought about buildings that belong to the people inside them. I thought about her hand on my forearm on that sidewalk, and how I'd felt it the whole drive home. I didn't contact her that night. Whatever I wanted. To say to Vivian Okafor, I needed to say to her face, looking at her where I could see her clearly and she could see me. Not over a screen, not over the phone. So I waited and I slept, and I woke up in the morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in a very long time. I called Deja. "Can you give me her number?" Her personal number, not the family group chat. A pause. Then, with barely contained joy, "I thought you already had it. We've been arranging things through you." "I'll text it to you right now," Deja said. I could hear her smiling. I wrote and rewrote the message 3 times. The first version was too casual, like I was scheduling a dentist appointment. The second was too heavy, like I was writing a declaration of war. The third was what I sent. "Hi, it's Serena. I heard something last night that I'd like to talk about if you're willing." Not over text. "Can we meet?" Her reply came 22 minutes later. I had spent those 22 minutes staring out my window at the alley below, watching a cat sit completely still on a fence, thinking about nothing that wasn't this. Yes, I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for weeks. Tell me when and where. I chose Piedmont Park because it was neutral and because it was beautiful. And for this conversation, I wanted to be somewhere beautiful. We met at the north entrance on a Thursday evening in mid-August, the light already going amber by 7 o'clock. She was there before me, sitting on a bench near the fountain, and she stood when she saw me walking toward her. She was wearing a dark blue dress, simple and sleeveless, and the evening light was doing something extraordinary to her face, and I almost lost my courage completely. I kept walking. We didn't hug this time. We stood facing each other with careful space between us, and we looked at each other for a moment that held a lot of things. Deja told you, she said. Yes, I wanted to tell you myself. I've been trying to. I know, I said. I understand. Can we walk? We walked. The park was full of the easy life of a summer evening couples and dog walkers and families with strollers. Joggers, a group of teenagers who had claimed a stretch of lawn with a Bluetooth speaker. We moved. Through all of it without touching, side by side, and I was aware of her beside me the way you are aware of something important. I want to say something, I said, after we'd walked for a few minutes, and I want to say it clearly without making it larger than it is, because I don't want to put pressure on you that doesn't belong there. Okay, she said. Her voice was quiet. This summer I've been in a difficult period. A breakup, a lot of time alone, a lot of shrinking down. And then I met you and everything felt clearer. Not because of anything dramatic, just because of who you are, and the way you think and the way you talk about the things you care about. And I know that's a lot to say after 6 weeks of knowing someone, but I also don't want to be someone who says nothing and then regrets it. She was quiet for a moment. We had reached a curve in the path where the view opened up to the lake, the water catching the amber light, still and perfect. She stopped walking, I stopped too. We turned to face each other. Can I say something now? She asked. Please. I have spent a very long time, she said, not looking at myself clearly, not understanding what I wanted, or understanding it and being too frightened to let myself understand it. And this year has been the most frightening year of my life and also the most honest because I have finally been looking. She paused. Her voice was steady, but I could hear something underneath it, something being held carefully. When I met you at the 4th of July, I felt something shift. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was in the middle of a year I was barely surviving, and the last thing I needed was to feel anything new. And now? I asked, very quietly. She looked at me. And the composed elegance she usually carried. Never coldness, never distance, but a kind of structured grace was gone. What was underneath it was open and real and completely undefended. Now, she said, I think telling myself it was nothing was one more version of the same lie I've been telling myself for 20 years, and I'm done lying to myself. I am so done. We stood there by the lake, the evening moving around us, the city humming somewhere behind the trees. The distance between us felt full, not empty, but full, charged with everything we'd said and everything that was still to come. I'm not going to rush you, I said. You're at the beginning of something enormous, and I know that. I'm not trying to pass, Serena. She said my name with a gentle firmness, the kind that stops an apology before it becomes unnecessary. Yes, I'm not asking you to wait, she said. I'm asking you to be here. There was a moment of complete stillness. A heron flew low over the lake and landed without a sound. Somewhere behind us, children laughed at something. I reached out and took her hand. She looked down at our joined hands. Then she looked up at me. And the expression on her face is something I will carry in my heart for the rest of my life, something between relief and recognition, like a door that had been locked for a very long time finally opening. Hi, I said, because it was the only word I could find that felt completely true. She laughed softly, and it broke something open in the air between us. Hi, she said back. What came next was slow. Deliberately, beautifully. Intentionally slow. Vivian had been clear about where she was coming out of a long marriage, coming into an understanding of herself that was still in progress, navigating the emotional and practical wreckage of a life that had been built and was now being rebuilt from the ground up. She was not in pieces. She was, as Deja had said, genuinely okay, genuinely finding her feet. But she was also in the middle of something enormous, and she knew it, and I knew it. And we both respected it. I was 26 and had been out since I was 18. I had had relationships. I knew what I was. But even I found love complicated, found intimacy complicated, found the business of truly knowing another person complicated. She was 42, experiencing the truest version of herself for the first time. That was not a small thing. That deserved room. So we moved slowly. Sunday morning coffee became a ritual. We would meet at a small place in Pond City Market that had good light and better espresso, and we would talk for 2 or 3 hours about anything and everything: her work, my work, Atlanta, architecture, design, her childhood in Lagos and London, and then Atlanta, My childhood in a small town in Georgia that I had left for college and never fully returned to. We talked about books we loved, about music, about cities we'd visited and ones we wanted to. We talked about the big things too, about grief, about the cost of silence, about what it meant to finally tell the truth about yourself. She sent me photographs from her phone. Buildings she walked past and thought I'd find interesting. A color combination she'd spotted on a wall somewhere. A shadow pattern on a floor. I sent her back color swatches I was working with and asked her honest opinion, and she gave it honestly and directly, which I had learned to expect from her. We had dinner together regularly, sometimes with Deja and other friends. Sometimes, increasingly, alone, just the two of us at small restaurants in neighborhoods we loved. Corner tables, easy conversation, the one particular feeling of being with someone whose company you have come to need. She was working through things I couldn't fully see. There were evenings when she was quieter than usual, turned inward, processing something I wasn't part of. She was seeing a therapist, a woman who specialized in people navigating identity shifts in the middle of their lives, and she mentioned this without embarrassment, which I loved about her. She saw the therapy as part of the work, the necessary work, the responsible work of becoming. I tried to give her space when she needed it. Tried to be present when she needed that. It wasn't always easy. I had fallen in love with her plainly, completely, the way you fall in love when you've already tried to stop and discovered you can't. And there were moments when the effort of being patient felt enormous. But I understood in a way that went deeper than strategy, that what was being built between us would only be worth having if it was built on honest terms. Her pace, her truth. Her first doubt she told me about Quame one evening over dinner. They had met in graduate school. Married when she was 28. 14 years together. He was a good man, she said this without qualification. Without the bitterness that often comes after a marriage ends. Genuinely, simply, clearly a good man. He had loved her as well as he could, and she had loved him, and something had been wrong in a way that neither of them had the words for until the words became unavoidable. He knew, she said. Before I did, I think. Or at least he knew something was wrong even when I was insisting everything was fine. He tried to open doors I wasn't ready for. She turned her wine glass slowly. He wasn't angry when it ended. That was the hardest part. He was just sad and kind. We spent months being careful with each other while everything fell apart around us. Are you in contact with him? I asked. Yes, we're figuring out what we are to each other now. That's still a work in progress. That sounds like a specific kind of grief, I said. She looked at me with something like gratitude. Yes, she said. That's exactly what it is. I held her hand across the table in the small quiet restaurant in Inman Park, with the noise of other people's evenings around us. She looked at our hands and then at me, and I saw something shift in her face, some last small barrier coming down. I'm grateful for you, she said. I want you to know that. I know the situation is not simple. Nothing worth anything is simple, I said. And then, because I couldn't help it, May told me that. Vivian laughed, startled and warm. Of course she did. It was a Friday evening in early September. The Atlanta heat was finally starting to release, that first whisper of autumn in the air, that subtle change in how the light falls. I was having a bad week. One of those weeks where everything goes slightly wrong in ways that pile up. A client dispute that had been dragging for months finally arrived at an ugly head. I'd spilled coffee on my laptop keyboard. I'd had a dream about Priya that left a residue of sadness. I couldn't shake even in the daylight. Vivian had sensed it without me saying much. She'd been checking in more often than usual, small texts in the morning. A call one evening that lasted 2 hours without covering any particular subject, just existing together over the phone. She had learned to read me in a way that still surprised me when I noticed it. On Friday evening, she texted, "Come over. I'll make dinner. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to." This was the first time she'd invited me to her apartment. We had been spending time at restaurants and parks in the Monroe family home and sometimes at my place, but her apartment had been her private space. She hadn't offered it before. The invitation felt significant, and I understood it was meant to. Her apartment was in a mid-century building in Candler Park on the top floor. It was, of course, beautiful. Books everywhere, stacked in ways that suggested genuine reading rather than decoration. A large drafting table by the window with plans spread across it. A wall of photographs, some personal, some of buildings. Plants, several of them large and healthy, filling the south-facing windows with green. The kitchen was a place she actually cooked in copper pots hanging over the stove. Dried herbs, a certain comfortable disorder of active use. She was cooking when I arrived. Jollof rice and fried plantains and suya skewers she'd marinated overnight, and the apartment smelled extraordinary. She was barefoot, wearing a loose linen shirt over dark trousers, and she opened the door and looked at my face and said, "You look tired." "I am tired," I said. "Come in. Sit down. Don't do anything." I sat at her kitchen table and watched her cook, which was an experience worth attending to. She moved through her kitchen with the same quality she brought to everything, unhurried, certain, knowing exactly where everything was and what it needed. Not performative. Just competent and completely at home in herself. We ate at the table by the window with the city going golden and then dark below us, and the food was extraordinary. I told her so, and she received the compliment simply, without deflecting. Afterward, we moved to the living room. She put on music, something slow and instrumental I didn't recognize but immediately loved. We sat on the sofa close enough that our shoulders were touching, and she poured wine and asked me to tell her what had been hard this week. Not politely. Not performatively. In the way of someone who was actually going to hold what I said, I told her about the client. About the keyboard. I hesitated before the dream, but she waited, and I said it. I had a dream about my ex. Woke up sad in a way I couldn't account for. Grief isn't linear, she said. I've been learning that this year. You think you've moved through something, and then a dream reaches back into it. Does it stop? I think you get better at sitting with it, she said. Better at letting it move through without getting stuck. We were quiet for a while. The music filling the room, the city visible through the windows in the dark. She turned to look at me. And I was already looking at her, and there was a moment, the specific quality of a moment where something is about to change. Where you can feel the door standing open. She started? And then she stopped, and I saw something on her face I hadn't seen there before. Uncertainty. Open, real, human uncertainty in a woman who was usually so composed. She was asking something without finishing the sentence. Yes, I said, before she could finish it, because I knew. I had known the answer for weeks. She leaned forward slowly, and I met her halfway. And we kissed for the first time. It was careful and tender and searching, the first step rather than the arrival. And after a moment she pulled back and pressed her forehead against mine and let out a long breath, the kind of breath that sounds like something releasing. Something that has been held for a very long time finally let go. I've wanted to do that, she said. For a long time. I was close enough to see her eyelashes. Her hand had found mine. I thought about her, about who she was and what this moment meant, not just for her feelings about me, but for everything else. This was not just a first kiss. It was the first kiss of a life she was finally, honestly living. How does it feel? I asked very quietly. She thought about it for a moment. She was always honest. Like the first sentence of a language I've been trying to learn my whole life, she said. I held her hand in the dark of her beautiful apartment while the music played. And neither of us moved for a long time. Fall came over Atlanta. It's not the dramatic fall of northern states. Atlanta in October is still warm. Still lush, the trees holding their green longer than you'd expect. But there's a softening. The heat finally releases. The light goes golden and long and falls at a different angle. The evenings cool first. I associate the autumn entirely with Vivian. With the texture and weight and particular quality of falling in love carefully. With intention, with both eyes open. We move slowly, and I love that. I was someone who had always felt in previous relationships a pressure to move fast, to commit quickly, to say the words early, to arrive at certainty before the certainty was really there. With Vivian, it was different. The slowness was not reluctance or uncertainty about what we were. It was respect for where she was in her year, for the enormity of what she was building, for the fact that what we were making between us deserved to be made properly. She was honest with me about her difficult moments. There were evenings when the weight of the year sat heavily on her, the loss of the marriage, the complicated process of rebuilding relationships on new terms, the navigation of a world that would receive her differently now. She would go quiet in the way she went quiet when she needed presence rather than conversation. I was learning to be present without filling the silence. I was not always good at it. I sometimes wanted to fix things that couldn't be fixed, only survived. She would say, gently, I don't need you to solve it. I just need you here. And I would try. There were also, and I want to say this clearly, enormous amounts of joy. Vivian had a dry, precise sense of humor that surfaced in the best moments that surprised me regularly. She took me to a lecture series on contemporary African architecture that somehow turned into the best evening I'd had in years. We cooked together every Sunday, a collaboration that involved her knowing what she was doing and me being enthusiastic and occasionally creative in ways she found more amusing than helpful. We walked through neighborhoods, pointing at buildings. We read in the same room for hours without speaking. She was meeting my friends and letting me meet more of hers. Marcus, my friend since college who had strong opinions about everything, grilled her about architecture for an entire dinner and then declared her acceptable, which was high praise from Marcus. My friend Joy, who had been my main support during the Priya period, pulled me aside after the first time the three of us had dinner and said, with Joy directness, she's extraordinary. Don't mess it up. I had no plans to mess it up, she told her sister. That was a big day. She called me afterward and I could hear both the relief of having done it and the tenderness of how it had gone. Her sister, 2 years younger in Houston, had cried. Not with difficulty, Vivian said. With love, the specific crying of someone who was glad a truth had finally arrived. She said she always knew something wasn't quite fitting, Vivian told me. She just didn't know what to do with knowing. She told her parents last. Her mother and father were in Lagos, her father having retired from his professorship and returned home. The call was long and happened late one night while I sat in the other room, available but not intruding. When she came to find me after, she was wrung out in the clean way you are when something hard is finished. My mother cried, she said. What kind? She thought about it. Both kinds. She said she needed time. But before we got off the phone, she said she wanted me to be happy. A pause. She meant it. I held her. And she let herself be held completely, without reservation. Which I understood was a form of deep trust from a woman who held herself with so much self-contained strength. You're going to be okay, I said. Not as a comfort. As a fact. The way Deja had always said it to me. The certainty that comes not from knowing the future, but from knowing the person. I know, she said. Then, after a moment, we're going to be okay. The word we landed in me like a key turning in a lock. That had been waiting. The Monroe family received the news about. Vivian and me the way the Monroe family received all significant. Information with warmth, with celebration. And with the complete unsurprisedness of people who had seen it coming for some time, Paulette Monroe already knew. She had known, I suspected, since the 4th of July. In the way that Paulette knew things about people that she held quietly until the right moment. When I told her formally in her kitchen in October, they told her formally in her kitchen in October, she pulled me into a hug and held on for a moment and then said, that woman has been waiting to find herself her whole life. I'm glad she found someone good in the process. Earl Monroe said, good, now she'll have someone to come to dinner with. He then returned to his newspaper. But that same evening, he had quietly added an extra chair to the dinner table and set it with particular care. And for Earl, that was a speech. Deja, who had known longest, worked hardest. Been the most careful guardian of this whole situation, hugged me for a very long time and didn't say anything for a while. When she finally spoke, it was, I have never in my life seen my aunt look the way she looks when she talks about you. And then, be good to her. I intend to, I said. I know. That's why I'm only saying it once. May Monroe received the news on the porch, afternoon coffee in hand, with the expression of someone confirming what they have known for months. About time, she said. You engineered the studio visit, I said. She sipped her coffee, serene and entirely without guilt. I gave things a nudge, she said. You were both being very polite about it. Thank you, I said. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. Be happy, she said. Both of you. That's all I want. The first Sunday dinner after Vivian and I had made things official. She arrived with a dessert she'd made specifically for this table, a version of a classic southern bread pudding with Nigerian spices and a tamarind caramel sauce. Something she'd been testing for weeks. Paulette received it with ceremony. May declared it remarkable. Earl had 2 portions without saying a word, which was the highest possible praise. Vivian sat beside me at the table as she did now always. Partway through dinner, she reached over and touched my hand. Briefly, without looking at me, a small, quiet gesture, just contact, just presence. I felt the warmth of it all the way through. This was what it looked like to be loved by people who weren't afraid of love. It has been just over a year since the 4th of July BBQ, where I met Vivian. We are together. Fully, completely, without qualification. She is, in every sense I can measure, more herself than the woman I met at that barbecue, and the woman I met at that barbecue was already extraordinary. Which is saying something. She is still doing the work. The therapy. The ongoing navigation of certain relationships that require patience, some people in her professional world. Some family members still finding their way to acceptance. She holds all of this with a clear-eyed honesty that I find consistently brave. She's not naive about the way the world works. She also isn't willing to make herself smaller to accommodate it, not anymore. She's done being smaller. I moved my design studio in November. I'd been working from my apartment for years, which was fine and also increasingly cramped, and Vivian's building had a second-floor unit with north-facing windows and exactly the right kind of light. She didn't suggest it, she would never push, but she helped me think through whether it made sense. The day I moved my equipment and she brought champagne and helped me arrange the space. And we stayed until midnight talking about design and architecture and what good light does to what's possible. And I thought, this is what I want. This is exactly this. In March, on a spring evening when the trees in Piedmont Park were just beginning to come back green. We were walking the same path where we'd first held hands, and she stopped and turned to me and said, without any preamble, I spent my whole adult life worried about how I was seen. By my parents, by my colleagues, by myself. I built things, literal buildings, partly to prove something. And this year I have finally stopped. Not stopped caring about quality or about doing things right, but stopped needing the approval as the primary reason. I just want to build things that matter, love people who love me back, and be honest about who I am. That's all I want. I thought about the community center, about the children running relay races in the courtyard, about the families tending the rooftop garden, about a building so full of life you could feel it from the parking lot. That's not less than enough, I said. That's everything. She looked at me. The park was coming alive around us, joggers, dogs, a couple with a baby in a stroller. The particular abundance of a city in spring. I love you, she said. She had said it before we'd found those words months earlier. Carefully on a winter night in her apartment. But she said it now differently. Outside, in public, in the open air without lowering her voice. Just said it plain and clear. The way you say something true that you are no longer afraid of. I love you, I said back. We walked on through the park, her hand in mine. The spring evening going golden around us. I told you at the beginning that falling for a married woman wasn't the real shock. I want to explain what I meant. The shock wasn't meeting Vivian. The shock wasn't even learning who she was in the process of becoming. Though that was one of the most profound experiences of my life, the real shock was what happened to me. I came into that 4th of July BBQ as someone who had been quietly retreating for months. From heartbreak, yes, but also from myself. From the version of me who had ideas and took risks and trusted her own instincts and showed up fully in her own life. I had been designing safe things, living a small life, eating cereal for dinner and calling it recovery. I had been waiting for something to change while doing nothing to change it. And then I sat on a porch in Decatur in the late afternoon sun with a woman I'd just met. And she listened to me describe a problem, and she said 4 words, trust your gut, with such simple, direct certainty that something in me woke up. I had forgotten. Somewhere in the months of shrinking that I had a gut to trust. Vivian didn't fix me. I want to be clear about that because I think that's an important thing to say. She didn't rescue me or complete me or make me whole. I was a whole person who had temporarily forgotten some of her own wholeness. What she did was see me. Clearly, quickly, without my permission or preparation. She saw the designer I actually was and reflected it back. She saw the person I was underneath the gray sweatshirt and the cereal dinners and the carefully managed sadness. And she looked at that person with respect and curiosity and interest, and I watched her at this time do something infinitely braver than anything I had been asked to do. I watched her look at herself clearly, at 42 years old, after decades of looking away. and choose honesty over comfort. Choose truth over safety. Choose herself. Watching that didn't inspire me in the cheap, easy way. It didn't make me feel like anything was suddenly possible. It reminded me in a way that went all the way down that honesty was possible. That you could look at yourself directly, no matter how long you'd been avoiding it, and survive the looking. That the truth, even when it costs you everything you thought you were, is lighter than the lie. The real shock was this: love, when it arrives in the right form, doesn't make you smaller or easier or more manageable. It makes you more yourself. The real shock was realizing how much of myself I had been managing down, out of caution, out of heartbreak, out of habit. And then realizing in the middle of a summer full of conversations, on porches and walks by lakes and dinners in small restaurants and coffee at a table with good light, that I didn't have to be small, that my gut was good, that showing up fully was not recklessness but integrity. So, when people ask me what changed that summer, I don't only say I found love, though that is completely, permanently true. I say I found myself again. And the love was how I knew I was going in the right direction. Last week, Vivian and I were in her apartment on a Sunday evening. She was at her drafting table revising plans. I was on the sofa working on a brand identity for a new client. The city was going dark outside the windows. The plants were enormous now, taking up all the south-facing light. The copper pots were gleaming in the kitchen. There was music playing, the same slow jazz that was playing the night we first kissed. Neither of us was talking. Just being in the same space, doing our work. Existing together with the easy comfort of two people who have learned each other's silences and found them good. She looked up at some point and found me, already looking at her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "A color palette," I said. "And you?" She smiled. That slow, unhurried, nowhere else to be smile that I fell in love with on a back porch in Decatur on a 4th of July. Afternoon that turned out to be the beginning of everything. "Good," she said, and went back to her plans. The evening went on. The city went about its business. I worked on my color palette and thought about her and felt, with a completeness I don't have a better word for, entirely and properly home.